Tim Shirely, the senior minister of the SouthShore United Church of Christ. This is a sermon for August 16th, Biblical Family Values. Briefly take a trip down memory lane with me this morning with some of television's most memorable and iconic programming. The Addams Family, the Munsters, Cheers, Friends, All in the Family, the Jeffersons, had to put those two together. Frasier, Married with Children, Roseanne, the Jackie Gleason Show, Soap, The Simpsons, Family Guy, The Cleveland Show. What do all these sitcoms, short for situation comedies, and other television dramas have in common? Perennial all-time favorites, shows like Dallas, Dynasty, Falcon Crest, and Knots Landing. What they all have in common is their dysfunction. It is their dysfunction that makes them entertaining, that gives them their hook, their angle. Now think about these shows. They are the antithesis. My Three Sons, Ozzie and Harriet, Leave It to Beaver. Then think of the period in which they were made. Call those supposedly salad days, Camelot years, a time warp in so many ways. A time when these supposedly sublime portrayals of lily-white American life were taped. Sadly, one of the best recent outliers we can think of that counterbalanced the blatant dysfunction inherent in these slapstick shows was the Bill Cosby Show. The main character in that series turned out to be not so much a family man after all. But I digress. I often do. A brief primer about what is formally called Bowen Family Systems Theory is in order here. This theory basically consists of a description of the many facets of what makes families tick or tock. Named for psychiatrist and researcher Dr. Murray Bowen, the theory does not focus on mental illness, but rather his analysis allows for an exploration of the challenges of being human and the relationships that affect us all, emphasizing group dynamics as opposed to the individual, even while stressing the concept of differentiation of self within the context of differing levels of maturity in relationships. Bowen's conclusions have been shown by researchers to be related to important areas of well-being, including marital satisfaction, the capacity to handle stress, make decisions, and manage social anxiety. That certainly would be helpful in these days of COVID-19 in 2020. It is vital research. So it is within this context that family systems have much to offer local missional congregations as they seek to formulate identity and live out their purpose for being in tangible ways, reflecting their core values as they seek to fulfill their sacred calling, carrying out their own unique mission and ministry. With this background now in view, our minds are now ready to engage a subject we frequently find in various places, woven deeply throughout the biblical narrative, but is specifically revealed in today's lection from the Hebrew Bible in Genesis. rampant dysfunction driving the story of Jacob and Joseph and their extended family. But first, some excellent contemporary examples to whet our appetite. Being very careful here, no matter one's politics or views on policy, it is evident, even obvious, that the President of the United States comes from a very dysfunctional family. His behavior is the byproduct of a demanding, domineering, and difficult to please father, Frederick Christ Trump. A family patriarch mirroring many of the negatively manipulative parental characteristics, much like we read about in the Bible. As with many poor parents, he played favorites in his patriarchal role. Think the story of Jacob and Joseph, anointing one of his children, you know who, while pitting all the siblings one against another, creating a toxic environment within an incredibly challenged and compromised family system. Now, many of you are aware that I grew up in a quintessential dysfunctional family system, because some of you read the book by historian Neil Thompson called Driving with the Devil, Southern Moonshine, Detroit Wheels, and the Birth of NASCAR, which also happens to be a family tell-all centered around my Uncle Raymond Parks, my mother's brother, and a founder of NASCAR. Raymond was the sixth of 16 siblings, the product of one father and two sisters. Don't ask, I'll tell. You really do need banjos playing here. Think Deliverance, the movie that has almost taken on cult flick status. My uncle was a moonshine maker and runner extraordinaire, probably the most famous in the South, head and shoulders above all the Johnny-come-latelys who are now on cable television doing their reality shows. Although I just love Tickle. He is a character in this series, by the way. Ironically, my grandfather, whom I never knew, was an educated man, but became a worthless drunk after the death of his first wife, losing the family store called the 5 Mile in the process. Didn't see that one coming. Raymond hated the hard, rugged life demanded by the hard-scrabble existence the average hillbilly was forced to carve out in the Appalachian Hills, and knew he did not want to become a part of the growing family legacy, drunk, imprisoned, or dead. No wonder I love Family Tradition, a hit country song by Hank Williams Jr., describing his daddy's troubles with demon rum, causing Hank Sr.'s death at the ripe old age of 29. He seemed so much older because of the life he lived. The lyrics are frankly way too close to home. So Raymond, who started out as a novice, an accidental apprentice, paid attention to the greatest detail, the fine art of shine making. He graduated from being a hired hand as a moonshine runner to selling his own smooth brew, setting up his own shop, a smooth, sophisticated operation, hiring his own drivers, many of whom were family members, cheap labor and trustworthy. It was an enterprise eventually rivaled by none. Everybody wanted some of his hooch. I guess what I am trying to tell you is that I come by my redneck roots honestly. I find it all colorful and comical, and it certainly explains a lot about my personality, perhaps even a bit about my character. It also partly explains why I am fascinated with family systems theory and try to learn from its principles. The main reason, however, is that I am a pastor, and all congregations are systemic. All churches are family systems. Oh well, enough of this. It is time for a sermon, and today we are going to look at a very dysfunctional family. Start the banjos. The story of Joseph of Technicolor Dreamcoat fame, shout out to Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice, cannot be told without exploring the multifaceted, complex, and complicated dynamics that drove the family dysfunction. Peeling back the onion of Joseph's lineage and legacy, we see a family system's nightmare looming at every turn. In fact, a critical reading of the characters in the book of Genesis, real or mythically imagined, reveals hyper textbook dysfunction on steroids from the very beginning. Adam and Eve certainly had their issues, unable to be at peace in what was described as a very peaceful place, Eden. They figuratively and literally, according to the story, they struggled to find relational equilibrium. Cain and Abel were precursors to a whole bucket load of sibling rivalry. That's easy for me to say. All those chickens coming home to roost in later adventures. Joseph was the son of Jacob, and Jacob was quite a work. You remember his story. Jacob was the son of Isaac, who was the younger half-brother of Ishmael, both sons born to the patriarch Abraham. Ishmael, being the firstborn, was entitled to a birthright and blessing he never received. Perhaps in some ways this sets the stage for all that follows. Instead, Ishmael was banished from the clan because of Sarah's jealousy that her servant, whom Sarah had strangely forced to sleep with her husband, conceived as hoped and planned. And here we go. Jacob was the second of twins born to Isaac, and came out of the womb clutching the heel of his brother Esau. More than a mere metaphor, it was an event that would define their relationship. Right up until the times Jacob stole his brother's birthright, and then later his blessing. A double whammy of biblical proportions. Jacob was the husband of Leah and Rachel. Leah, the older sister, having had what the Bible calls weak eyes. Interpreters have said that her eyes literally bugged out of her head. That is biblical speak, a polite indication that she was plain in her appearance. Rachel, however, was the beauty and the affection of Jacob's eye. Polygamy alone makes for frighteningly horrific family systems. And in the ancient world, this, of course, was commonplace, normative, routine practice. Ironically, the deceiver is deceived by his father-in-law Laban, Leah and Rachel's father, and discovers the morning after their nuptials that he has been royally duped, tricked into marrying the homely, bug-eyed girl. Any additional commentary here would serve no good purpose whatsoever. Yes, this is a very sexist text, very misogynistic, not unlike many, if not most, narratives in the Bible that reflect an ancient patriarchal culture. Besides, we are all but certain this story was written by a man from a man's biased perspective, as were all these stereotypical texts. Jacob ain't happy. After agreeing to 7 more years of toiling for Laban, he is then allowed to marry the girl of his dreams, Rachel, the beautiful. The writer of Genesis tells us that Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. Remember that not so subtle caveat. Interestingly, Leah turned out to be far more fertile than her initially barren sister, creating quite a conundrum, an intriguing family dynamic indeed. As Isaac aged and his eyes grew dim, it was time to give Esau, as the eldest son, the father's blessing. Esau already having given away his birthright for a bowl of red stew. Pottage, anyone? Well, you all know how that turned out. The master manipulator, deceiver extraordinaire, with a lot of help from his overprotective, overfunctioning, busybody mama Rebecca, who also plays favorites in this narrative. Who doesn't? Yikes. I sense a theme developing here. He tricks his father into thinking that he is his brother Esau. The ruse works, and Isaac gives the irrevocable, shall we say, non-refundable blessing to the wrong son, the younger son. Esau got screwed out of every benefit the firstborn was supposedly guaranteed, normally legally afforded in the ancient world. One of the few silver linings in this twisted tale of toxic tragedy is that eventually the two brothers would reconcile, Esau being the far bigger man in that sibling rivalry and relationship, willing to let bygones be bygones. Well, it is obvious that Jacob was anointed as the golden child, for even after his deft cunning and continual deceit, his constant conniving, even encouraged, egged on by his mother at the end of his father's life, he continued to live the charmed life. He was Teflon. He had wrestled with God and won, prevailing even over the Holy One, now named Israel, the prize for his conquering efforts. Who does that? Between his 2 wives, Leah and Rachel, he was a prolific father, producing many offspring, his progeny becoming legendary, including the 12 sons who would come to represent the 12 tribes of Judah. But one was his favorite, special. Always number 1 son. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his brothers. I am sensing a theme here. Joseph's brothers despised their youngest sibling, abhorred the special relationship he shared with his father, and resented the special treatment the golden child received. They were forced to labor in the field while Joseph frolicked about in his coat of many colors, sticking it in their face, never letting them forget, a constant visual reminder that he was Daddy's fave, and perhaps more importantly, in their not so humble estimation, they were not, and they never would be. Understanding family systems theory can go a long way to helping us have peace within ourselves as we learn about our family dynamics, our history, and the reasons for patterns and practices and long-held and honed family traditions. In all honesty, our country, divided by divisive politics, a breach, a great gulf characterized by the chasm of an irreparable schism, is indicative of a ginormous family systems nightmare. Disagreements no longer a matter of mere opinions, but reflecting cultural and sectarian religious values and the cult of personality that drives a given position. Some family members no longer even speak with one another because of the bad blood, the outright hostility. Makes for a great Thanksgiving holiday dinner. Sad, but that is where we are. Finally, and most specifically for our purposes, understanding family systems enables us to develop as beloved faith community. A phrase I frequently borrow from the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A friend of mine, a colleague in the clergy business, once declared that churches are greenhouses for pathology. Sadly and unfortunately, that is true to a degree in many instances. This is especially so for churches in the free church tradition, where we practice a democratic, a congregational form of governmental polity. There are some people who have no boundaries, who have no voice at home or anywhere else except for their local church. And so they tend to exercise their right of free speech and leadership to an unhealthy degree, sometimes becoming bullies, often at the expense of the health of the church. One reason I prefer to speak of a church as a faith community rather than a faith family is that none of us gets to choose our families, but we all get to choose the communities, religious and otherwise, in which we joyfully commune. The story of Joseph and all his kin is a reminder that God works within and through the family dynamics that frame our larger humanity. The call to all of us is to do the best we can do, to constantly strive to be better than the day before, to become as fully human as we can be in this life, to be all we can be, as John Shelby Spong would say. Knowing about family systems and having at least a precursory, a basic understanding of its rubrics is one key to helping congregations unlock and unpack the secret to success in building holy relationships, beloved faith community, churches that are relevant and relational, vibrant and vital as they carve out their unique niche in ministry and mission. Knowing ourselves, knowing who we are, individually and corporately, can help us become the best congregation, the best church SouthShore can be. Inevitably, we will fail to some degree, and in some respects fall short of our goals and our loftiest and noblest expectations. We will occasionally, if not frequently, disappoint ourselves and others in the process. It is part and parcel of being human. But in the end, fulfillment really is all about the process, all about the journey. and our continuing to seek our best selves and the best communities we can envision and create. All of us, along with the various communities we as a part all comprise, are always evolving, or should be. The end nowhere in sight, nowhere on the horizon of this big adventure we call life. Like an answer to a child's inquiry on a long trip, are we there yet? The answer is always the same. No, because we never are there. We never arrive at our ultimate destination, at least in this lifetime. The stories of Jacob and of Joseph and their complex and complicated extended family is a reminder to us all. A lesson we all need as we navigate and negotiate our goal of living together in harmony and unity, not only as family units, but especially as beloved faith communities, believing we have been called by God to be together as we make the personal choice to be in myriad intimate relationships in the beloved faith communities we delightfully choose for ourselves, all informing and impacting our lives while worshiping and serving together as much of one mind and heart as possible. It is never easy and demands our best selves, our best efforts, our commitment and hard work. The United Church of Christ right now is selling t-shirts declaring, loving one another is essential work. How very true. The task is never finished, but seemingly only just begun all the time. But the rewards are indeed a blessing in so many ways, but specifically as we seek to expand our devotional spiritual lives in sharing the gospel, the good news, while constantly, passionately, zealously striving to bring about the realm of God on earth as we practice the kind of social justice described by Jesus and reflected in the great banquet feast revealed in the Gospels, welcoming and including everyone in every way possible. In the name of the one who creates, redeems, and sustains, and is not only the architect, but is always in the wings of all our myriad and complex family systems. Amen.